Open your Bibles to Acts chapter 9. We are celebrating the 4th of July today. It's kind of a big deal in case you didn't notice. Also, in case you didn't notice, there are celebratory Oreos in the lobby that are both red, white, and blue and fireworky, right? They have pop rocks in the Oreos. So have fun with that afterwards. But we are not here this morning to celebrate the birth of a country, the continuing existence of a country. We are here this morning to celebrate the resurrection of Jesus. And we celebrate as believers in Christ because of what transpired in the book of Acts. As the gospel expands beyond the walls of Jerusalem into the neighboring regions of Judea and Samaria and ultimately to the ends of the earth of which we are a part. So we are here this morning because the gospel was not contained by Jerusalem or by the boundaries of Israel, but it burst out of its birthing place and it has reached the ends of the earth. We are here to celebrate that gospel. And that story would not be complete without the story of Saul of Tarsus and his conversion. Saul eventually becomes known as Paul, not because God changed his name at his conversion or anything like that. It seems as if Saul was the Jewish name of this man we come to know as Paul, and he was very proud of his Jewish heritage, even though he was born outside of Israel. Paul was the Romanized name of this individual, Saul. And so it's not until much later in the book of Acts, when he is in Cyprus, that he begins to be referred to by Paul and not Saul. And it seems as if, I kind of think this is part of what he's maybe has in mind when he writes 1 Corinthians 9, that I became all things to all people so that I might win a few, right? In other words, I am in Rome. I'm going to go by my Roman. I'm proud of my Jewish heritage, but I don't want my Jewish heritage to be a stumbling block. I've got this Roman identity also. I'm going to go by that name. Paul was invested in the spread of the gospel to all nations and to all peoples, and he was willing to go to great lengths to remove whatever natural boundaries may have been there in order to accomplish the spreading of that gospel. Acts chapter 9 is the story of Saul's conversion to Christianity. And it's probably the most well-known conversion in history, if you think about it. It's recorded 3 times in the book of Acts. That's how significant it is. Once here in Acts chapter 9, and then Paul is going to share it again in chapter 28, and then he's going to share it again in chapter 26. This is a significant conversion. One of the reasons that it is so significant is that Paul will be used by God to take this gospel to the Gentile world, and we this morning are very thankful that he did. But like many things in the book of Acts, the conversion of Paul is descriptive of what happened to him, not prescriptive, right? We've said this multiple times. There are things described in the book of Acts that are not necessarily prescribed. In other words, they're not things that we should necessarily expect to follow exactly in this way. It's describing the events, but not everybody's going to be converted with a blinding light from heaven and a voice that comes out of this light and falling on your face to the ground and blindness, and you don't have to sit around and not eat and not drink for 3 days, as Paul did. And again, we're all thankful for that, right? I think all of our churches would be a whole lot smaller if that were the process. But there are some things, though, that even though this is not necessarily the definitive pattern of the way things are going to happen when you are converted to Christ, there are some things that we can take from this conversion of Paul and we can learn from it. And that's what we want to do this morning. We want to learn from this conversion that is so well known and so significant even for us still today. Let's read Acts chapter 9, starting in verse number 1. It says, "But Saul, still breathing threats and murder against the disciples of the Lord, went to the high priest and asked him for letters to the synagogues at Damascus, so that if he found any belonging to the way, men or women, he might bring them bound to Jerusalem. Now as he went on his way, he approached Damascus, and suddenly a light from heaven shone around him. And falling to the ground, he heard a voice saying to him, 'Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me?' And he said, 'Who are you, Lord?' And he said, 'I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting. But rise and enter the city, and you will be told what you are to do.' The men who were traveling with him stood speechless, hearing the voice, but seeing no one. Saul rose from the ground, and although his eyes were opened, he saw nothing. So they led him by the hand and brought him into Damascus. 3 days he was without sight, and neither ate nor drank. Now there was a disciple at Damascus named Ananias. The Lord said to him in a vision, 'Ananias.' And he said, 'Here I am, Lord.' And the Lord said to him, 'Rise and go to the street called Straight, and at the house of Judas, look for a man of Tarsus who's named Saul. For behold, he is praying, and he has seen in a vision a man named Ananias come in and lay his hands on him so that he might regain his sight.' But Ananias answered, 'Lord, I have heard many things about this man, how much evil he has done to your saints at Jerusalem. And here he has authority from the chief priest to bind all who call on your name.' But the Lord said to him, 'Go, for he is a chosen instrument of mine to carry my name before the Gentiles and kings and the children of Israel. For I will show him how much he must suffer for the sake of my name.' So Ananias departed and entered the house, and laying hands on him, he said, 'Brother Saul, the Lord Jesus, who appeared to you on the road by which you came, has sent me so that you may regain your sight and be filled with the Holy Spirit.' And immediately something like scales fell from his eyes, and he regained his sight. And he rose and was baptized, and taking food, he was strengthened." Here this man, this Saul, making his way to the city of Damascus, which, by the way, one of the oldest cities that we have record of in human history. You go back to the Old Testament, even Abram was familiar with Damascus. It's been around for a very long time. There was a large Jewish settlement in Damascus. We know this because Nero actually slaughters thousands of them at one point in his reign. And so Saul, who is intent on eradicating the name of Jesus from Israel, gets letters, permission from the high priest in Jerusalem to go to Damascus, to enter into the synagogues that are there, and arrest anyone who might identify with Jesus, believing that this Jesus character has risen from the dead and is in some way the Messiah. And he was to bring them back to Jerusalem to presumably stand trial and to potentially even be put to death, much like he did with Stephen. What can we learn about this miraculous conversion? Paul, heading to Damascus to arrest individuals, finds himself arrested by Jesus. And there is this sudden transformation that takes place. What can we learn? Number one, there is no one beyond the reach of the gospel. Right? That's probably the most obvious point. I mean, if Saul of Tarsus can be converted, there is no sin too great. There is no individual who has gone too far that the gospel cannot forgive. And consider what it says about Saul here. In verse number 1, it says, "But Saul, still breathing threats and murder against the disciples of the Lord." It's an interesting phrase. In some translations, I think, translate this as he's breathing out threats, as if he's making these threats, kind of like a dragon breathing out fire, right? But when you look at it, it's actually not him breathing out, it's what he's breathing in. Right? It's the Greek word behind this. It's like he's inhaling threats and murder. It's the very air that he is breathing. In other words, this desire to persecute Christians, to rid Israel of this idea that Jesus could in some way be the Messiah, the Son of God, was a dominant, motivating force in Saul's life. He was not content even just to eradicate the name or the way out of the city of Jerusalem. He was willing to travel far and wide. He was consumed by his desire to eliminate Christianity by any means necessary. This is not just an individual switching sides, then, is it? This is not just like a pro athlete deciding to change teams, deciding to take their talent to a different team because they decide they have a better chance of winning, right? Nor is it like someone defecting from one country to the other because you don't like your country's chances or you think your country is moralistically defective in their desires. It's not like that. In both of those scenarios, the individuals are reasoning their way through and they're coming to a reasoned conclusion that I should not stay loyal to the group I'm currently in. I got to go give my loyalty someplace else. That is not what happened with Saul. This is something totally different. Saul wasn't weighing his options, considering the pros and cons. He wasn't concerned about an imminent collapse in Judaism. As a matter of fact, you read in Philippians chapter 3, he says, "Though I myself have reason for confidence in the flesh also. If anyone else thinks he has reason for confidence in the flesh, I have more. Circumcised on the 8th day, of the people of Israel, of the tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew of the Hebrews. As to the law, a Pharisee. As to zeal, a persecutor of the church. As to righteousness under the law, blameless." Paul wasn't weighing his options here. Paul was committed to his Judaism. He was zealous for the law. He was proud of his heritage. He was exactly who Stephen had described at the end of his sermon: stiff-necked and uncircumcised in heart. When you put all that together, folks, and it's hard to overstate how unlikely a conversion story this really is. For someone like Saul, who had so publicly attacked the church, to now convert to Christ would be humiliating. Not only is it a complete and unexpected reversal, even for Saul himself, think of the humiliation. I mean, most of us don't like to be wrong, even in the little things, right? But I mean, humiliation in his own home country. I've been leading this charge, and I was wrong. Not only was I wrong, I've joined them. Humiliating in the church. Hey, wait, weren't you the guy that put Stephen to death? Right? How hard would that be? I mean, if Saul is sitting back and just weighing his options here, conversion would never have happened. There's just no way. There's too many natural hurdles. So how is it possible for someone like Saul to become a Jesus follower? And folks, the only answer is that God does not sit around and wait on us to pursue him. God pursues us. That's how we were all converted. That's all of our stories. God pursues sinful people. Paul writes in Galatians 3, "Not that I've already obtained this or am already perfect, but I press on to make it my own because Christ Jesus has made me his own." That's the reality. How did Paul become a Christian? If you were to ask him, the answer would be Christ Jesus made me his. Luke chapter 19, verse 10 says, "For the Son of Man," Jesus speaking, "for the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost." God is the seeker. And for Saul, it was a blinding light from heaven that outshone the sun, and a voice calling his name, and it was blindness, and there was this amazing event that transpired. For most of us, it's not going to be that. I would venture to say it's not going to be that for any of us. It's much more probably normal than that. We hear the gospel perhaps repeatedly, and then one day it is almost as if a light shines from heaven, and it is almost as if scales fall from our eyes, and we see the glory of the risen Christ. And folks, what this does for us, and I say this oftentimes, but I say it because I know the discomfort that comes here, because people start looking at this kind of doctrine and go, well, man, that makes me really uncomfortable, because what if God doesn't choose, right? I don't like the thought that maybe this is somehow taken out of my hands. But folks, the reality that God pursues sinful people is your only hope. Paul says there is none who seeks after God. None. So then why then does Paul tell us, why are we commanded in other scriptures to seek God if we cannot, if we do not? Well, the reality is we're commanded to seek God because if you begin to follow through on that command, guess what? It means God is pursuing you. Where do you think that desire came from? Do you think the evilness of my own heart produced that desire? You think Satan somehow tricked me into following God, or he tripped himself up? Oh, if you find yourself pursuing God, then to God be the glory, because great things he has done in your heart, right? And that's our hope. Because what that means is that the child that you have been praying for years and years and years is not beyond the reach of the gospel. The parent that you have wished would come to Christ, of you whom you have shared the gospel with repeatedly, who seems completely indifferent or even antagonistic towards Christianity, is not beyond the scope or the reach of the gospel. Or the coworker who goes out of his way to belittle Christianity every time you are around is not without hope in the gospel. Or the friend who thinks your faith is an emotional handicap is not beyond the reach of the gospel. Why? Because God delights to save sinners. Hey man, think about this. Paul had no preparation here. Right? Paul didn't go to church many times before he was converted. I mean, he heard the gospel through Stephen before he put him to death. Paul was unprepared. Paul was not seeking. And yet God arrested him and made him his own. By the way, if you were wondering if maybe in some way Saul was pursuing God, Galatians chapter 1, Paul describes his experience. Listen to what he says. For you have heard of my former life in Judaism, how I persecuted the church of God violently and tried to destroy it. And I was advancing in Judaism beyond many of my own age among my own people. So extremely zealous was I for the traditions of my fathers. But when he who had set me apart before I was born and who called me by his grace was pleased to reveal his Son to me in order that I might preach him among the Gentiles, I did not immediately consult with anyone. Paul, how did you come to be converted to Christ? And you know what his answer would be if he sat around and gave you a little bit more detail? God set me apart before my birth. He called me by his grace, and he revealed his Son to me. Man, listen, there was no prayer by Paul. There was no Sunday school. There was no regular church attendance. He didn't go to a home group Bible study. God simply said, you are mine. And then he revealed the truth to Paul of who Jesus really is. It's God's activity. And folks, there are those who do not and will not come to church, do not want to hear the truth about Jesus. This conversion of Saul gives us hope that there is none beyond the reach of his grace. Number 2, conversion always requires meeting Christ. always. It may not be the same blinding light or voice from heaven, but regardless of how you came to hear and believe the gospel, you were given by God a glimpse of the reality of who Christ is. Saul's given this glimpse, and again, it's this vision, this thing that he sees, and he responds, "Who are you, Lord?" And he said, "I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting." Can you imagine? I mean, sometimes we try to put ourselves in these stories and go, I don't even understand. Like this is such a bizarre story, but put yourself in Saul's shoes for just a minute. You've been busy persecuting the church. It is you are just breathing in the air of church eradication, right? Like you want nothing more than to see this thing done. And all of a sudden you get this blinding light from heaven. And Saul clearly recognizes that this light is some divine manifestation, right? He hits the ground, which, by the way, is what everybody in Scripture does when they come in contact with a divine light from heaven, be it an angel or some manifestation of God. God either hides you in the cleft of the rock or you hit your knees, fearful for your life, which ought to make us question when someone says, I had this vision of an angel or of Jesus, and it was just such a peaceful, calming experience. That is not the experience of John or Isaiah or Saul or Moses. It was a terrifying experience to be in the presence of that kind of holiness and power. And Saul hits the ground. And then there's this voice, "Saul, why are you persecuting me?" Now, I think this probably both surprised and terrified Saul even further. Who are you, Lord? And I wonder if Saul at this point had a feeling as to what the answer was going to be. Can you imagine the fear that would have gripped Saul's heart when out of the divine brightness the response comes, "I am Jesus." Man, the name that Saul hated the most. The name that he thought was dead. What do you suppose would have crossed Saul's mind in that moment? I can think of two possible things. Number one, I am so dead. Right? But instead, what does he hear? Instead of being on the receiving end of his own personal plague or being swallowed up by the earth, he hears the voice again. "I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting, but..." Man, we talked a couple weeks ago about how Luke put that little but in there when talking about the story of Simon the magician to let us know that something there's like all this positive and then but there's a reversal. Now Simon, this negative story about a man who ultimately rejects the gospel. Here there's a but it's a different kind of reversal. Right? It looks like judgment is coming to Saul. But Jesus says, "But rise and enter the city, and you will be told what to do." Folks, the mercy of Jesus in this moment is breathtaking. It's breathtaking. Especially when considering that Jesus says that you are persecuting me. Which we'll come back to that point in just a minute. But folks, the reality is salvation does not occur apart from meeting the risen Christ. Again, this is all of our stories. If you look back in verse number 1, it says that Saul went to the high priest and he got letters from them to persecute or to arrest followers of the way. I had a conversation with someone yesterday who was like, what were Christians known as before they were known as Christians? Well, this is one of the ways. They were known as followers of the way. Now, where would that have come from? If you remember back in the Gospels, Jesus says, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father unless they come through me." So it appears that very early on, before this term Christianity is coined at Antioch and sticks with the church, there's this phrase, the followers of the way, that kind of gets attached to the believers because that's what they were doing. They were following Jesus, who claimed to be the way. And so it was recognized very early on that a conversion into Christianity meant an identification with the one who was the way, Jesus. It's about following him. He is the way of salvation. It's not church, right? Church is the body that we join after we have met Christ. It's not prayer. Prayer is the language that we engage in with God after we have met Christ. It's not good works. Good works is that which naturally comes out of our lives after we have met Christ. Salvation is not about a good feeling or a better family or a nicer job. Salvation is fundamentally about an encounter with the risen Lord. It's always about coming to Christ. It's always about seeing his majesty, trusting his sacrifice, and following his authority. So I think thought number one in Saul's mind was, I am so dead. Thought number two, you're dead. Right? At least you were. So how can I be persecuting you? Right? Saul, why are you persecuting me? And Saul's like, wait a minute. I'm persecuting the church. You're dead. You're not even here. How am I persecuting you? And folks, the beauty of this statement comes out of what Jesus says again in the Gospels. Matthew 25, verse number 40, Jesus says, truly I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of these my brothers, you did it to me. Whether you met their need and gave them food and drink, or whether you withheld the food and drink from those in need, as much as you did it to the least of my people, you did it to me. Jesus identifies with his people. In our suffering, he identifies with us. He is the head. We are his body. And those that persecute the church, it is taken personally by the head of that body. The attacks against his church that are happening around the world, even right now, today, will not go unanswered. It is not just an attack against a group of people who are seen as threats by some governments. It is the body of the Lord Jesus, and he will respond. Those who would be converted to Christianity then must also identify not only with Christ, but with his people, with his body. Folks, there is no such thing as a convert to Christ who does not love the church. Listen, that's a hard statement, right? But it is a true statement. You cannot read the epistle of 1 John and not come to this conclusion. If you do not love the brothers, who is that? That is the church. Then the love of God is not in you. It doesn't get much clearer than that. You cannot love the head and not love the body. The two go hand in hand. And yet we have so many in our day and age who have kind of this take it or leave it attraction to the body of Christ. Christianity has been so individualized in our culture. I think it was on the radio, and I think it was Lacey who was actually telling me this story. She heard it, this father, and said he couldn't go to church one Sunday, and he and his son, I don't remember what they were doing, but for whatever reason, they didn't go to church on a particular Sunday. And the dad says, and this is an advertisement for a Christian radio, so you may have even heard it, but he says, you know what, going to church is really good, but, man, Christian radio host, she can really bring it. Right? And that's the way most people think. The church is good, but as long as I can get good Christian music or radio sermons or a Bible podcast, then really I'm good, right? Me and Jesus. But listen, folks, you are not good if that is our mindset towards the church. The Lord did not save you and place you in a virtual community where all contact happens via the internet or the open airwaves. He has placed you in his body, the church. So if I could, we started this live stream thing, and you guys know I was hesitant for a while. And COVID, and we decided it would be a good idea, and I'm glad we did it. And I'm glad there are those who have still not been able to return, and sometimes when you're homesick, it's nice to be able to click in and join in when you can't be here, when God has just prevented you by his own sovereignty from coming. If you've ever been a parent, particularly a mom, sometimes it's like 2 or 3 weeks in a row because it's one kid after the other. But folks, my hesitancy is that there are those who will excuse their church attendance for virtual attendance. My concern is for those of you out there who regularly choose to sit at home and watch church rather than being a part of one. What you are watching right now is no substitute for being a part of the body of Christ. Find yourself a local church, whether here or somewhere. Engage in that community. Third lesson. By the way, these lessons will get quicker as we go, right? Number 3. Conversion to Christ. Y'all are looking at your watch going, whoa, we still have at least 2 more, right? There's 4, at least 2 more. And we're already 30 minutes in. Number 3. Conversion makes you a new person with a new purpose. Saul was motivated by eradicating the church, hating the name of Jesus. And in an instant, all of that changes. In an instant, a single meeting with Jesus, Saul recognizes his superiority. Lord, who are you? Lord, recognizing the divinity of the one who is now before him. In verse number 8, Saul rose from the ground, and although his eyes were open, he saw nothing. So they led him by the hand and brought him into Damascus. And for 3 days he was without sight and neither ate nor drank. When Saul was finally able to open his eyes, he couldn't see anything at all. I can relate to some degree. I know what it's like to have vision one moment, close your eyes and open your eyes and have virtually no vision. My story is not as exciting as a blinding light from heaven. Mine was more of a flash of a red band right before it catches me across the bridge of the nose and my eyeballs. But either way, having sight one moment and having zero sight the next, it's kind of a scary thing. You begin to wonder, will I ever see again? Jesus confronts Saul. There's a conversion that takes place, but things do not get immediately better for Saul. As a matter of fact, things get difficult. We sing a song about, though you slay me. And yet there is this expectation in Christianity that when I come to Jesus, or sometimes even the way that we present the gospel to people, that if you come to Jesus, life is just going to be grand. It's going to be a party. It's all going to be happiness. Saul couldn't even see. That was his introduction to the church. And he sat for 3 days, neither eating nor drinking, just thinking, I believe, about the meaning of what it was that he had just witnessed. His life would never be the same. He had gone to arrest Christians, and he found himself arrested, now with a new purpose. And he would forever now consider himself to be a servant of Jesus. It would now be his life's mission to share the good news that this Jesus, whose name he wanted to erase from all of Israel, was in fact the Son of God who had come to save sinners just like himself. If you let your eyes come down the passage just a little bit in Acts chapter 9 to verse number 15, the Lord says to Ananias, "Go, for he is a chosen instrument of mine to carry my name before the Gentiles and kings and the children of Israel, for I will show him how much he must suffer for the sake of my name." In an instant, everything transformed for Saul. All of a sudden, he has a completely different perspective of life, completely different purpose for living. And I wonder, what is your life's mission? What's your goal? Some of you are young and are like, I haven't even thought about a life's mission yet. Like, I'm just trying to get through the week. Right? I'm trying to get through the summer, maybe. Back to school. What is your goal? Is it to retire comfortably? Is it to raise a nice family and have nice, successful children? Teens, is it to have lots of friends? Make lots of money? Kids, is it to annoy your brothers and sisters or parents as much as possible? It's my life's goal. Folks, what if Jesus is calling you to a radical change of direction? What if your salvation doesn't just mean entering into heaven on flowery beds of ease, but actually taking up weapons of spiritual warfare and engaging in ministry for the gospel's sake? What if your life means more than what you do, or how much you have, or the family that you belong to? What if Jesus, in converting you, also arrested you for his purpose, and no longer your own? For I am no longer mine. I am bought with a price. That's what Saul came to realize. Jesus has bought me. This is not my life anymore. It's not mine. It's his. And look, it's easy to look at Saul and say, yeah, but look what he did. I mean, he was an apostle, and he traveled the entire Roman Empire to preach the gospel, and he wrote most of the books of the New Testament. Of course God had a purpose for him. But I'm just me. God hasn't called me to do any of those things. But he has called you. And he has called you to serve him, to give him glory, whether you eat or drink or whatever you find to do, to share his name with your circle of influence. What is your purpose in life? Perhaps we need a radical redefinition that is based on the fact that Christ has redeemed my life. My life is no longer my own. Number 4, when conversion comes, it builds the family, doesn't it? It builds the church. Verse number 10, Paul is supposed to go to Damascus. He continues on his journey. In verse number 10, another character comes into the story. It says there was a disciple at Damascus named Ananias. And we don't know a lot about this guy. We don't know how he came to be a follower of the way. Maybe he had heard in Jerusalem during Pentecost and then went home to Damascus, or maybe he left during the persecution that happened, or maybe he was a convert of those who scattered out of Jerusalem when the persecution came. We don't know how Ananias came to hear the gospel, but he did, and he himself becomes a disciple, and now the Lord comes to him with a very specific set of instructions, right? Ananias says, "Here am I, Lord." And the Lord said to him, "Rise and go to the street called Straight." Now, the word straight is interesting because in our language, it can have kind of a dual sense, can't it? It can mean straight as in there's no bends or turns in the road, but straight can also mean have kind of a moral sense, can't it? And, we say things like, "Oh man, you better straighten up." Right? Parents, you know what that means, right? You better get yourself together. Right? Or we may say things like, "Oh man, he's really gotten his life straight over the last year. He's really straightened things out." What does it mean? There's a moralistic idea to that, right? And there's kind of this interesting double meaning to this word here, because the same thing is true in the Greek. With this word straight, it can carry both ideas. And so he says, "Ananias, I want you to go to the street that is called Straight. It has no bends in it. And I want you to meet a man whose life is now straight. I have straightened him out. And his name is Saul of Tarsus." He's going to be in the house of Judas. You know Judas, right? Not that Judas. Different Judas. "For behold, he is praying." And I wonder what was going through Ananias' mind. "Oh, wait a minute, Lord. I've heard of Saul. He killed Stephen. Why is he at Judas's house? And why would you want me to go find him?" And God's response is, because he has seen a vision of a man named Ananias who came to meet him. Wait a minute, I'm Ananias. That's my name. Yeah. He's seen a vision of a man named Ananias come in and lay hands on him so that he might regain his sight. But then Ananias does vocalize his concern here. "Lord, I have heard from many about this man. how much evil he has done to your saints at Jerusalem, and here he has the authority from the chief priest to bind all who call on your name. Lord, that's me. That's Judas. Again, why is this man at Judas's house, and why am I going there? It's kind of like a Jonah scenario, isn't it? We read through the book of Jonah here in previous Sundays, and here this guy Jonah is supposed to go to Nineveh, this enemy of Israel, these people that Judah and Israel hates, has been at war, and they're vicious people, and Jonah's like, no way. I don't want to go to those people. Do you know who they are? Do you know what they've done? But the Lord says to Ananias, go, for he is a chosen instrument of mine to carry my name before the Gentiles and kings and the children of Israel, for I will show him how much he must suffer for the sake of my name. And now listen, what is about to happen, what we're about to read, is nothing short of amazing. And it's amazing for a few reasons. Listen, so Ananias departed and entered the house. There's reason for amazement number one. Ananias actually, not like Jonah. He doesn't run in the opposite direction and have to get swallowed by a whale before he decides to obey. He goes in spite of the potential danger. And laying his hands on him, he said, Brother Saul, the Lord Jesus, whom appeared to you on the road by which you came, has sent me so that you may regain your sight and be filled with the Holy Spirit. And immediately something like scales fell from his eyes, and he regained his sight, and he arose and was baptized, and taking food, he was strengthened. You know what the most amazing part of the story is? I mean, like the scales fall off his eyes. I remember as a kid like that. Like, what was that like? You have like lizard eyes, like some things I want to know here. That's pretty amazing, maybe a little gross. But you know what I think the most amazing part is? Look back at verse number 17. Ananias, who is coming face to face with the sworn enemy of the church, the man who was breathing threats and death to the church, the man who stood by and consented to the death of Stephen. He lays his hands on that man, and the first words that Saul hears out of this man's mouth is, brother. Brother Saul. And he's filled with the Holy Spirit. And the gospel builds a family. The question is, are you ready for that family? Because the gospel is going to bring people. It's going to attract people. God is going to convert people. And this for Saul would have been, the most unimaginable. I can't imagine what it would have been like for him to have heard that word. But for Ananias, we're talking mortal enemy. We're talking about a Jew going to a Nazi. We're talking about a black man going to the leader of the Ku Klux Klan and calling them brother. Are you prepared for the type of family that God desires to build? It's easy to say that we want converts. We want to see many people come to Christ out of our community. We pray for God to grow his church here in Holiday. But listen, folks, if you pray it, you better be ready for it. And it's easy to want more people who are like you, people who have their lives together, who understand proper church decorum, who speak well, who have their lives together. And it's just easy to connect with those type of people. They're people that are easy to befriend. That's easy. But this was Saul, the most dangerous opponent of the church. Are you ready for when God brings people who may naturally be considered your enemy? Who might not look like you, live like you, talk like you, or vote like you. Are you ready to receive those people as brothers and sisters in Christ? Folks, the gospel is still going out. God is still pursuing sinners. There is none in this community beyond his reach, no matter antagonistic towards the gospel, no matter how indifferent they are. He is converting people. And he is building his church. Where does that leave us? Are we ready? Are we prepared to treat them as brothers and sisters in the household of God? Let's pray. Father.